Shockwaves are still being felt from the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade, holding that there is no constitutional right to abortion. Joining me to discuss this and what it means is President of the Judicial Crisis Network, Carrie Severino, and Director of the Northwest Center, a crisis pregnancy center in Washington, D.C., Susan Galluci. Ladies, thank you for being here. Carrie, I want to start with you. In his final opinion issued on Friday, Justice Sam Alito wrote that Roe and Casey were wrong and had to be overturned for this reason. We therefore hold that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey must be overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion must be returned to the people and their elected representatives. Now, the Supreme Court decision doesn't really end abortion. That was the way it's been portrayed in the media, in many places. What's the story?
Yeah, the real story is this puts abortion back where it was for most of American history until 1973, which is that the American people get to determine how they address this issue. We know that at the time of, by the early 20th century, that meant that in all states in the country, abortion was outlawed. That had changed a little by the 1970s, but there's a right of people in the states to make laws regarding this, and then there is also a role in certain circumstances for the federal government potentially as well. Okay,
the courts are no doubt going to weigh in. There's that Louisiana injunction where a judge put a hold on the trigger law in my home state that would have outlawed it immediately in Louisiana. Your thoughts on what that will that sustain judicial review?
I don't think so. I think we're seeing, a last-ditch effort of like, oh my gosh, we can't get the Supreme Court to do what we want. Maybe we can find another court. But I think we have to be careful because we have seen state courts get very activist as well. Recently in Kansas, actually, the state court had basically a mini Roe. They decided, well, our Constitution covers this too. It doesn't, and there's actually a constitutional amendment being proposed there. But we might see other states run into that same problem. So look at what your state court is doing and make sure that those judges also are going to be faithful to that state Constitution.
Susan, there are 26 states now that are limiting, in some cases banning abortions. Some of these have already begun the process of trying to limit. Are crisis pregnancy centers ready to deal with the women who are going to really be in need of your services, and explain what those services are? There's been a lot of misrepresentation of what crisis pregnancy centers do.
Yes, I think they are ready because it's an expansion of the work we've been doing all along. So pregnancy centers, some are medical and they offer pregnancy tests and sonograms, and so many women change their minds or continue their pregnancy because they see the life growing inside them and they see the truth. Also, they provide what we call options counseling. So a woman's thinking about abortion, so we talk it through with her. We let her know this is what fetal development is. This is biology. This is what abortion looks like. Have you had an abortion before? What is that like for you? Why are you choosing abortion? And some, like the Northwest Center, where I'm the director, we also have a maternity home because a lot of women are kicked out because they're pregnant. So we provide those resources. We provide them in a non-judgmental environment. We provide them for free. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. A lot of times people are volunteers and have a heart for that ministry, but they're professionals. They're providing the truth. They're not, I've read a lot about dissuading. We don't dissuade women from abortion. We present them with the truth and with the facts, and to say, if you want to continue your pregnancy, there are resources to help with your rent, to help with the baby items, to give you that emotional support. So we give them true options to continue their pregnancy.
Well, it's called being truly pro-choice. You give them the other choice. And the rap on the crisis pregnancy centers is, well, you only care about that child until it's born. That is not true. I mean, I've visited a lot of these places. I've covered some of them, done events for some of these places. These women are, by and large, and mostly women, are volunteers. They go out of their way to teach maternal care, train the mother in job, to seek jobs, and they're watching the children during the day. It's an amazing kind of untold story. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about it in the days ahead. I need to play this for you, Carrie. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reacted to the Dobbs ruling this way. Listen.
What I believe that the president and the Democratic Party needs to come to terms with is that this is not just a crisis of Roe, this is a crisis of our democracy. The Supreme Court has dramatically overreached its authority. This is a crisis of legitimacy.
Carrie, first of all, are you concerned that you have Congress people, and it's not just AOC, questioning the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, and do they have the authority to do what they've done?
Yeah, I love that she thinks it's a crisis of democracy. She seems to have forgotten that she's in the democratically elected branch. The Supreme Court is not, and what they've actually done here is give it back to democracy. What happens when people read rights into the Constitution and aren't there is they're taking things out of the democratic process itself. And so this is actually a triumph for democracy and the rule of law, but maybe AOC missed that section in civic class. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's a good time for a refresher. AOC was also asked about the statements made by Senators Manchin and Collins, who feel that they were misled by Supreme Court Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh during their confirmation hearings regarding Roe and the precedent. Here's what she had to say.
If we allow Supreme Court nominees to lie under oath and secure lifetime appointments to the highest court of the land, there must be consequences for such a deeply destabilizing action and hostile takeover of our democratic institutions. I believe lying under oath is an impeachable offense. I believe that violating federal law in not disclosing income from political organizations, as Clarence Thomas did years ago, is also potentially an impeachable offense.
An impeachable offense. Carrie, your reaction to all of this?
If she wants to impeach those judges, she should look at impeaching some of the liberal judges who also said things that then they voted differently. Justice Kagan, who said in her hearings, there is no federal constitutional right to same-sex marriage, later got in the court and voted to create a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. Justice Sotomayor, who said that she understood that the precedents were that there's an individual right to bear arms, and then she went in the court and voted the opposite direction. So, we know that they can describe in their hearings what the state of the law is, but none of them on either side of the aisle can promise how they're going to vote in cases. They didn't do that, and she's just trying to find ways to really name call here, but it has no relation to what they actually said in their hearings.
Yeah, no, the depiction of this as somehow a breach of democracy or a rupturing of our system, it's breathtaking. No one said this when Obergefell came down and same-sex marriage was allowed suddenly. That was overnight by the court. I mean, we have to say that.
Overturning a bunch of state laws.
Yeah,
right?
overruling state law. Nobody said that the Supreme Court is illicit or not legitimate, or we have to stake out the houses of congressmen, of justices, and yet we're seeing this pressure now. Related to that, Susan, since that leaked draft of that opinion came out, we have seen crisis pregnancy centers targeted by fire and vandalism throughout the country, 21 cases so far. You have a center in D.C., one similar to yours was attacked here on Capitol Hill. How are you dealing with the security at the facility? And has federal law enforcement or local law enforcement been in touch about the security of not only your staff, but these very vulnerable clients you deal with every day?
So we have increased security, we have added cameras, and I've been very pleased with Homeland's response and the local district police in DC. They've been phenomenal. They have reached out to us. They have been on our block every day since Friday, except for today, and been there. So just that presence, especially because we have the maternity home, I was even more worried for the women who lived there, but they have been really wonderful, and I appreciate that.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, and surprising, frankly, because that's not the case cross country. So it's good DC is engaged. Carrie, we've also seen the attacks on churches being vandalized. Just in the past several weeks, in Virginia, graffiti was sprayed all over the walls of a church. Statues of a church in Buffalo, New York were smashed. That historic St. Coleman Catholic Church in West Virginia burned to the ground. Arson is suspected. Are you surprised we're not hearing more about these acts of violence and pressure being applied? I mean, why are we hearing nothing about this aside from few outlets?
Yeah, I mean, it is a rash of incidents, and they're coordinated. I mean, there's this group, Jane's Revenge, which has Antifa connections, has been advocating for these things, as well as Ruth Sent Us, another group, these pop-up kind of attack groups. What should be happening here is this actually is a violation of federal law. The FACE Act that people are most familiar with because it protects entrance to clinic access, like for Planned Parenthood clinics, and it gets vigorously defended in those cases, also explicitly applies to churches and should apply to crisis pregnancy centers as well, because they're offering pregnancy counseling, and that's covered under the Act. This is a violation of federal law, arguably a hate crime. It's a real. It should be dealt with seriously.
Do you and other crisis pregnancy centers feel vulnerable now? I mean, do you feel like you're under attack or potentially under attack?
Absolutely. Again, it was really scary on Friday, and then over the weekend, worrying about it. Thankfully, again, for the police response and so many people praying for us, really felt that protected. But yeah, it's definitely a vulnerability that we've never felt before.
And people should understand, these are mostly volunteer organizations that use every penny to feed the ladies living with them and their children, help with the maternity care, help to house them. Now they're having to pay for security 24/7. And I know that from across the country. I've been getting calls all week about this. I want to move on very quickly, Carrie. We keep hearing, and I'm going to talk about it with Congressman Chris Smith in a moment. Nancy Pelosi, today the president, said we need to codify Roe v. Wade into law. I mean, look, you were a clerk on the Supreme Court. Will that withstand judicial review? Can the Congress, does it have the capability of creating a federal right to something like abortion that we just said is in the hands of the states?
Yeah, well, there's so many problems with this idea, starting with the fact that they don't even have the votes to do it. They would have to override the filibuster, and even last time they tried to do it, partly because they overreached so far. They didn't just try to codify Roe; they tried to eliminate conscience rights, eliminate parental notification, all these kind of wish list of the big Planned Parenthoods of the world. But there's a real question. I mean, remember with the Obamacare case, and they said, well, the Commerce Clause, anything that affects commerce, basically we can do. I suspect that would probably be their argument again this time, and we know how successful that was. Even though John Roberts found a way to uphold Obamacare, his vote was recognizing that the Commerce Clause doesn't mean that Congress just has a blank check to do whatever they want that might affect commerce. So I think there'd be real questions on every level to that kind of proposal.
No, I've talked to a number of constitutional scholars who think Congress simply doesn't have, they can enforce a right, but they don't have the duty to create one. And that is what they would be doing here. Carrie, I want to move on to this notion that the Supreme Court overreached its authority here. And many in the media are citing Clarence Thomas's concurrence, where he says, not only is this right to privacy wrong, we need to look at everything that proceeded from it. Everything from contraception to gay marriage should be looked at. Sam Alito, in his opinion, said, no, we're not going any further than abortion. Well, which is it?
Well, actually, Justice Thomas joined Alito's opinion in full. So this decision doesn't touch those things. And what Justice Thomas was writing separately to say is, hey, I agree, this decision doesn't go there, but here's a real problem with this substantive due process, which is this notion that something that's inherently procedural, that is due process, somehow confers substantive rights. And that the court has used that historically to create rights to a whole range of things, not just contraception and same-sex marriage, but also things like the Dred Scott decision, creating a right to own another human being in slavery. I mean, so there's a whole lot of bad things that have flowed from it. And he said that doesn't mean that any of these rights they've tried to find through that are necessarily illegitimate, but that clearly isn't where they come from. No. We need to re-examine them all.
Susan, before we run out of time, there have been reports in Time magazine and other places that since the HIPAA rules, the privacy rule, does not apply to crisis pregnancy centers, that those centers might share people's personal information with groups looking to investigate a person or share private information with groups that would discourage a person from getting an abortion, for instance. Crisis pregnancy centers are being depicted by Planned Parenthood as, quote, sites operated by anti-abortion activists that work to guide women to abortion alternatives in the guise of providing health care. What do you make of those accusations?
I think they're totally false. I think we are portrayed wrong. I think that most or all crisis pregnancy centers work out of love. It's love for those on the margins, and that love is not to get them in trouble, to use any type of coercion. It's to supply them, to connect them to healthcare, to make sure that they have resources, and to walk alongside of them. So I think those are just baseless.
Carrie, before we're out of time, this landmark decision was leaked early. John Roberts is supposedly investigating. Where are we, and why haven't the leakers or leaker been revealed?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were maybe wishfully thinking maybe he already found the person, and after the term was done or after the case came down, he was going to announce it. Well, the term is now officially over, and there has been no announcement. And the clerks generally will start leaving starting the first week of July. So it seems to me that unfortunately we've seen he has not been able to follow through on that. That is really worrisome, because if we saw one major case leaked this term in a historic way, we might see multiple ones next term. There's been no consequences, and that's really a sad moment for the court as an institution.
Well, you know better than I in Washington, when you start monkeying around with the rules, lowering vote counts, blowing out filibusters for certain issues, it becomes epidemic, and the other party uses it next time around. I fear this is going to be the future of every major Supreme Court decision. Leaks and pressure campaigns before they're announced. Now, that's ruinous. Talk about an insurrection on a branch of government. This would be it. Carrie and Susan, thank you both for being here.